Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we'll talk about Spine 326, Metropolitan, directed by Whit Stillman, 1990. Unlike the last one, I definitely enjoy this film. I really, really do. It's a story about it follows a group of young socialites and debutantes in the midst of the debutante season, 1 year around Christmas break, and so these are all college aged, and they are born into very well off established families in New York, and actually one of them gets sort of roped into this group, and he's somebody who does not like any of this debutante nonsense, and fashions himself as a socialist. But he will clarify that he's not a Marxist, that he actually prefers the social theories of Fourier. So yes, he is a Fourierist. But it's kind of looking at this and it becomes that he actually feels a certain closeness to the group, and there's even Audrey, yeah, there we go. I'm just trying to get everybody's names in place, but Tom Townsend is the Fourierist, but in the midst of this group there's Audrey, who ends up falling for him, and she represents kind of the innocence. She's a big fan of Jane Austen. Actually, her favorite Jane Austen novel is Mansfield Park. But Townsend's kind of one of the things that you find about with Townsend is that he has literary opinions, but they're not necessarily his own. They all come from literary critics, and this one in particular comes from Lionel Trilling. So yeah, you can kind of tell why I like this film. And that's really what it comes down to. It's a more recent comedy of matters. It's the kind of films that you would see in the 1930s and 40s. Not quite screwball, but there's the witty, sophisticated. I'm thinking like Preston Sturges. It's basically taking those types of films and then setting it in more or less the present day. By present day, of course, this is 1990, and there is a kind of charm to go back to that. And what you may like and what you may hate about this film is that this is a film that emphasizes dialogue, and which I think is kind of a lost art form, film dialogue, because the rationale being, okay, this gets into a little bit of film history, or a little bit into like the larger world of film. Film in its beginnings, or cinema in its beginnings, had a lot of carryovers from theater, and it was approached and understood as film theater, where you work with actors, you have a setting, actors work in a space, and you photograph it. So basically it becomes film theater. Then the art form there were enough adventurous types that saw that there were some other things that you could do in film that you couldn't do in theater. And so the argument was, why not emphasize those? Why do you have to bring up this older archaic form? Let's push it forward. And so films started, little by little, to become more filmic. And you could say Alfred Hitchcock was part of it. I guess, some other. I'm trying to think of like I'm kind of as I'm thinking of directors, they're kind of jumping all over the timeline. But I think like Stanley Kubrick would be one of them. I guess Ingmar Bergman to a certain extent, but he didn't completely shed. But the thing is, he didn't completely shed his theater sensibilities. He retained those throughout his career. He just understood that he also was working in cinema as well, but he never lost that theatrical sensibility. So the point is that while the emphasis was more on the visuals and letting the cinema dictate it, not some other art form dictate it, show don't tell, those aspects, I think because of that, dialogue took a step back, and based on a lot of films, I think they've taken even some more steps back. There are not a lot of films that have come out nowadays that are known for their dialogue. The only one I can think of, really, and also because I've seen this, is The Social Network. And that's just because of Aaron Sorkin. But really, not a lot of films are known for their dialogue. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that it has to be just dialogue. And that's the other thing, is that it also depends. My impression of all of this is that a film should be whatever it needs to be to either tell its story. Most of the time, it's telling the story, but in a broader sense, is that a film needs to do whatever it needs to do in order to be. So if it's a mood piece, then it's going to play by a certain set of rules. It's going to use some elements more than others. A mood piece is going to use less dialogue. There's going to be more emphasis on the visuals. So certainly cinematography and production design, and mise en scène, and that's how it will work. And really just conveying the emotions, and maybe not depending on a dramatic narrative. But if you are telling a story that has a dramatic narrative, then that needs to service it. And I would take it further that even though you may not emphasize certain aspects more than others, I would still want to pay attention to those things. It shouldn't be. It may be lower priority, but it shouldn't be the weakest. It shouldn't be the thing that kills the film. So even if it's not going to be brilliant dialogue, I'm not asking for brilliant dialogue. I just want some good dialogue that doesn't make my ears cringe. It is possible to have your ears cringe. So back to Metropolitan. This is an example of a film where it's dialogue done right. It's very true to the characters. It's very. There's a lot of witty moments in it. The other reason why I like this film is that I have a bit of a soft spot for young adult affairs, and by young adult I mean like college age, where it's youth acting like youth, sitting around talking about big ideas, but coming off as a bit naive and not having a whole lot of experience to back it up, and very unproven, but also at the same time full of ambition and wide-eyed and very committed to who they are, who they think they are, and so I have a bit of a fondness for it, and I also get the sense that this does. I don't say it outright critiques, but it certainly looks at a lot of like modern sensibilities and values and kind of sort of questions it. And going back to Tom and Audrey in one of their conversations about what they mentioned about Jane Austen, and one point that Audrey makes is that well, if Jane Austen were to look at our wars, would she find it very odd? This is a very loose paraphrase, but basically, if you and that's kind of how I see Audrey is sort of she's what would happen if Jane Austen were to visit. I think it's supposed to be the Upper East Side, even though Tom Townsend is from the Upper West Side. And shocking. Okay, this leads into another thing that people tend not to like about Whit Stillman and Metropolitan in particular. If it's not the dialogue that can irritate some people, it's the fact that he writes about wealthy, well-to-do people, like how dare he, and that really irritates me. Because what it does is it assumes that if you reach a certain status or if you are a certain person, that means you're not human, and I don't buy that. I mean it's the worst, and you can be scolded for if you treat another group of people as not human. Like if it's almost like saying that if you're poor that you're not human, or if you're this ethnicity or this cultural background, that means you're not human. And yet it's okay to do it with with the upper class and say that they're not human because, well, clearly they're not. They exploit the workers. They make everybody's lives miserable. And also I also don't think that's the point. I don't think Whit Stillman is one to promote one class over another, and that's not really the point. It's just it was more he saw this story and he saw that he could do it, and this was his first feature film, and so it's all about taking whatever resources you have at your disposal. This is something that Robert Rodriguez has said in his book Rebel Without a Crew. And he took advantage of those resources, and he could see that story, he could see it play out, and that's what he did. He was able to tell it in a very realistic and very but still very captivating and intriguing way. And what's wrong with that? And if you don't like it, you don't have to go for it. It's like going to a restaurant and complaining that they serve a certain dish. And I would even say that I would extend this to the Criterion Collection in general too. You don't have to like everything that they offer, but somebody does. And for me, I like this film, and I don't like it because it deals with the upper class. I don't think of it in those terms. I think of it as who the characters are, what the story is, how it plays out, how do you get from one moment to the next, and that's what I tend to like, and that's what I take away from it. I don't think about all the other stuff. Now, having said all of that, it is quite refreshing to see people who are in that upper economic bracket treated with a bit of humanity, which also means that there are flaws, but it doesn't mean that they are abysmal or without any kind of redemption, or they're just pure scum of the earth. And that's also refreshing. And in fact, I am aware of this little anecdote that involves Whit Stillman. He was once hired to write an episode, I think it was Law and Order, one of the Law and Order series, and the story was it was this yuppie who gets murdered, and so he was brought in to help write it, and I don't know if it was the studio or the I think it was the producers, the showrunners. They didn't like what he wrote because he actually kind of made the character a little bit more human and three-dimensional, and they weren't really interested in that. So, I mean, I guess that's it. I guess my thing is that if you're one to care about three-dimensional characters in your films, then I'd say it should apply to everybody, including the people you don't like. I understand not liking a particular status. I understand that. But at the same time, it should not mean that you deny one's humanity because because of certain unlocked achievements, as it were. It's really, really ridiculous. It's very petty. And now, having said all that, I also understand if you just fundamentally not like the film. Again, everybody has their own taste. I just happen to really, really like this, and I like it, and I like it because of the dialogue and the characters, and I feel in some ways closer to them. They talk about things, they address things that are more in line with my interests, and I and again it's that soft spot for being college age, for being in college and being wide eyed about things and being very emphatic about certain causes and beliefs and stances but not having a whole lot of experience to back it up. You just really really commit to it, and that's why I think of it very fondly. I would say something very similar to Kicking and Screaming as well. So, but yeah, so of course I like this, so of course I'm going to recommend it. But I would definitely recommend it for those who want to see, who believed that, if you've ever thought that the films from the 40s were never, that there were, if you want to think that there is somebody like Preston Sturges out there, go check out Metropolitan. And it's actually a film that actually dates fairly well. It was made in 1990. There was no emphasis on a particular year. There was a subtle sort of costume change or a subtle costume change amongst the group. Whereas in the beginning they seem to evoke more of the 30s and 40s, but then when they get to Christmas Vacation and the what they call the orgy week, they seem to be they seem to take on more of the 50s. But other than that, it doesn't emphasize so much on a particular year, and it actually gives it a certain it makes the film, I think, age a little bit more gracefully. Whereas if it was so rooted in its time, it probably would have been thought of like, it would have been seen more as a curiosity. So yeah, if you like those kinds of films, if you want to see a more recent example of something like that, I would highly recommend Metropolitan. If you like your dialogue, if you just want to hear like examples of good dialogue, you may not end up not liking it for a lot of other reasons, but I would say that it's a good reference if you want to know like how to write good dialogue, which is, I think, is something that needs to be brought back more in film. I think it's a shame that it often takes a back burner position. So there you go, Metropolitan. And until next time, take care.